Hi everyone! So Season 4 has been out for a little while, and one of the big highlights introduced in this patch are the Tormented bosses, the level 200 versions of all of the boss ladder encounters that are much more rewarding and much more difficult, so that we don't farm Duriel 1,000 times over and over every season in order to get our Uber Uniques. Now, Uber Uniques grinding has been alleviated a bit thanks to just the loss of power of Uniques with the new temper mods for regular items. And in general, you don't really run that many uniques anymore. However, you also need those Stygian Stones in order to farm those tormented bosses, which are supposed to be like the challenge basically to do, and something that makes this whole boss grind more exciting and more rewarding as well once you have a fully decked out endgame character. And a lot of people ask me, how do I get those Stygian Stones? Because no one really gets any of them. Well, a few of them you can get once basically for doing the season journey. There's the last 2 chapters in the season journey where you get, I think, 3 and then 8. So for chapter 6 and 7 respectively. So that's 11, which means you can do 5.5 summons. And then you also get a few from the Iron Wolves. I think it's 4 for completing the entire Iron Wolves like reputation grind all the way to level 18. However, that does take a while. And you can repeat that, but it's not really a very efficient way of farming those stones. So all in all, you get maybe like 1.5 or 2 dozen or so of these stones just from playing the game. And then you're kind of like left on your own with grinding the pit. And this is really where the problem arises, I think. If you look at this here, I have 21 Stygian Stones right now. I have used a bunch. I probably had like a total of 30 something, a little bit more than 30 maybe. And this includes all of the season journey stuff and 2 characters to level 18 on Iron Wolves. So all in all, I have just not really found any Stygian Stones. And the same seems to be true for many other people grinding the pit. Those stones are just not dropping. Here and there, if you farm the world bosses all the time, you might get lucky and find one, because the world bosses drop either one of the shards or one of the Andariel mats or Duriel mats or one of those stones. So I'm not sure if they have the equal chances, but it might be like 1 in 5 basically for a world boss, which is kind of okay. But if you go to the pit, well, those things were advertised as dropping deep in the pit, and I have gone deep into the pit and I do not find those stones. So I'm not sure what's up with that. I'm not sure if this is the intended drop rate, because you can grind for hours not getting a single stone, even if you speed farm like 3 minutes, like level 80s or level 90s pits or something, which is already way above the difficulty level of what a tormented boss really requires of your character. So they still start dropping kind of early. I've heard from people getting them as early as like pit level 50. Personally, I've not found any of them below 61, so I figured it would be like 61, where it's like the minimum drop. But maybe there's also some kind of scaling chance as you go higher. But so far, I've not really noticed that. So farming 50 or 60 or 80 or even all the way to 100, I just have not really received any more stones going to the higher tiers. So kind of makes me wonder what's up with that. But the reality is, those stones just don't drop. If I had to put a number on it, it's probably something like a 1 in 50 drop rate. So maybe like 2% or so for completing a pit run, because I've done at this point hundreds of runs and I've gotten like a handful or so of these stones from the pit. So it's really terrible. And considering that we get so many of all these other boss materials, you see how many distilled fears I have. I have like living steels here. I have lots of these Duriel mods. I've actually done like a huge rotation the other day. I have like hundreds of Grigars basically that I've killed so far, and Varshans as well. I've killed them probably like 150 times this season. And the entire idea of this patch with this tormented bosses was that we don't have to farm level 75 Varshan all day anymore. And we don't have to one-shot Duriel anymore all day long in order to get our items. Instead, we would be able to do those tormented bosses, but it turns out we just can't. And people always ask me on stream, why am I farming normal Duriel? Why am I not doing the tormented version? Well, it turns out no one has those stones, so no one can summon Duriel. As soon as you have used up your initial supply from the season journey, it's basically over. And that is really bugging me, I gotta say. I would really love to fight tormented bosses only and not do the normal version of these bosses, even if it's really hard and on hardcore even somewhat dangerous. But they're just much more fun, and I don't really understand why Blizzard decided to make those Stygian Stones out of all things so hard to come by, because it's not like you really get incredible value out of this for doing like a Tormented Varshan. Because it turns out that I made this video before season start talking about how the boss summons now give you the ×5 loot, and then you get ×5 the boss summons for Duriel, and then you get even more summons of Duriel. Well, it turns out these tormented small bosses don't actually drop materials, or not more materials at least. So a Tormented Varshan still only gives you like 1 egg, and a Tormented Grégoire only gives you 1 shard. So that also seems kind of odd to me. I'm not sure why that was done this way. At the very least, I would have expected 3 of those mats, because you also pay 3 times the amount to summon the Grégoire or summon the Varshan. So I think you should at least get 3 of those. But okay. But the fact that we just don't have Stygian Stones to even do those bosses is kind of a problem, I feel. And not only that, I have not 100% confirmed this, but it seems like that the small bosses don't actually have the same uber drop chances as the large bosses. So the small bosses being Grégoire, Varshan, Zir and Beast, and the large bosses being Andariel and Duriel. Usually Andariel and Duriel have a 2% drop rate for uber uniques. With ×5 the loot, you have 5 chances of 2%, so around 1 in 10. Tormented, Duriel and Andariel should give you an uber unique. However, the small bosses, as far as I know, have a 0.5% drop rate in the normal versions, and apparently that is also just being ×5 for the tormented versions. So 5 times 0.5 giving you a 2.5% drop rate. Now, I don't have a large enough data set to 100% confirm this, but I've asked a lot of people, and it definitely seems like they don't have the same drop rate, at least, as Duriel and Andariel, which is another problem here, I think. Because those tormented bosses are all supposed to be kind of like an equal difficulty. In fact, I would argue that Beast in the Eyes is probably the hardest out of all of them, which is one of the small bosses. And, you know, no one farms those because, number one, you don't multiply the materials because you spend triple, but you only get 1 summon material for the next boss. So you don't even get the same outcome. And you also have lower chances for uber uniques, apparently. So that is another problem here, I think, with those tormented bosses, and I think that should be addressed. I don't think it makes any sense that they don't have the same drop rates for uber uniques, because you have to pay the cost of Stygian Stones, and you have to fight a boss that is in somewhat equal power level, but you get less loot, which makes no sense to me. For now, I can only say I recommend to just farm Uber Duriel as much as possible with those Stygian Stones if you have any, because that seems to be like the safe bet in terms of uber unique drops, and it's also quite easy encounter compared to some of the others. So the easiest is probably Tormented Grégoire, I would say, and followed by Duriel. So you don't really want to farm Grégoire because of what I just mentioned with the materials and potentially lower drop rates, and instead you should be farming Duriel as much as possible. That being said though, those the tormented versions are also kind of like a really good way of getting 925 unique drops, because sometimes those uniques may not always be level 925, in particular for weapons that may be important. For example, if you try to farm a Ramadadnis for a barb or so, then you might want to do a Tormented Grégoire a little bit. But with the changes to item power and the 925 loot being so available, it doesn't seem to be such a huge problem as it was in the past, in like Season 3, for example. So Tormented Grégoire versus normal Grégoire, it might give you a bit of an edge there in terms of getting certain weapons. Either way, I gotta say I'm somewhat disappointed in how the Stygian drop rate is just so low. I was expecting we'd get a lot more of these, not necessarily like every run in a pit or something, but the fact that I can grind for like 2 hours and not see a single stone, and I need 2 of them to summon a single boss, is kind of ridiculous, especially with all these other boss materials dropping. There is no way in any form or shape to catch up to those materials with my Stygian Stones. Like, I will just have hundreds of Distilled Fear and Living Steel and Varshan mats, and I can never use that for the tormented versions. So this means I will always have to go back and farm the low level versions and go one-shot Varshan another 200th time in order to get a drop or something like that. So that is kind of a miss in my book, and I would really hope that Blizzard would reconsider this and buff the Stygian Stone drop rate, and also buff the drop rates of all of the tormented versions to the same level, so that we can farm any of them and get our Ubers and potentially get any other uniques that we may want from those bosses as well. Because right now it seems kind of pointless to do anything besides Duriel anyway. Duriel is way easier than Andariel. You get a lot more mats for Duriel as well. So everyone just does tormented Duriels, and not really any of the other tormented bosses make any sense. And that's kind of a problem. Lastly, there's also another pretty strange phenomenon that maybe you have not noticed yet or not heard yet, but every time you defeat one of those bosses on the boss ladder, the uniques that drop cannot have greater affixes, it seems. At least I have not gotten a single item that has a greater affix that is unique from those bosses besides Uber uniques. So I have gotten like a greater affix Melted Heart, for example, and a greater affix Stardust. So that has happened. But the normal uniques, all these like Tybalt's Wills and Flicker Steps and X-Files rings, they all have 0 greater affixes. So that may be intended because the bosses are kind of like the easy way to get your build going, to get those uniques that you may want for your build, but they just don't have greater affixes. It's kind of strange. So you can't really go farm them and try to hope for like a really big drop or something like that. You have to find those greater affix uniques in basically outdoor content or like randomly in a dungeon or something like that, which actually I think is kind of cool because it keeps those random unique drops more exciting. But it's just a note on the side. If you're trying to farm some of those bosses in order to get your, greater affix, something really big, like a cooldown roll on this God Slayer or something, well, you won't get that. So you have to find that or have to buy it from someone. So it's just a note on the side. And lastly, while we're at it, I guess the last point of feedback here is, why do these materials stack to 50? I think this is a very outdated number in 2024. Look at these distilled fears, and I've just run like 30 Beast in the Eyes yesterday or something, and I've run like 50 Grigoires yesterday, and I still have like 4 stacks of Living Steel here. Like, okay, I do play a lot, but the amount of material income is ridiculous compared to in the past, and those stacks of 50 don't really cut it anymore. In particular, when you have this low amount of Stygian Stone drop rate, and you don't want to farm like Grigoire for the 500th time or something like that. So I think something needs to be done here. I don't see why these materials can't stack to like 999, for example. So you could literally just carry around like 1 stack of them in your inventory, and you don't have to go to your stash every time and throw in those bunch of little materials because they start piling up and they start cluttering your inventory. Or why don't we just have like an extra boss summon tab here, for example, so that you can have everything cleanly sorted in your inventory. That would be cool as well. But yeah, this is just like my 2 cents on this topic here right now. So TLDR, if you're trying to farm stones, bad idea. It just doesn't happen unless you really grind out a pit a lot and you want to get your 12 out of 12 master working on all of your items. Yeah, maybe you get a handful or so of them on the way. Maybe if you're lucky up to 10 or so, but that's probably about it. Those stones just don't drop, and there's no secret to it in getting them, it feels. So I don't know, I have not really seen any results of like, stones dropping a lot more in the higher tiers. I've been farming those and nothing is happening. So I think it's just a kind of like miscalculation maybe from Blizzard. Maybe they thought we would farm pit more, or maybe they thought these strawberries are fine and they want us to do Duriels 100 times every day or so. But for now, this is what we got. In any case, hope you enjoyed this little video here. Let me know what you think about this. What are your experiences with those bosses, those stones, etc. I'll be quite curious to hear some more numbers as well, because I'm still trying to put everything together and get a full picture. But for now, that's what we got. So hope you like this, and see you guys next time.